Our next speaker is Mariana Montes from KU Leuven, and her talk is entitled Metadata Schemas Updates, JSON Schemas, and Storage in iRODS.
Indeed. Thank you, Corey. You can hear me well? In fact, let me know if you don't. Okay, I'm Mariana Montes. Some of you already know me. I've been talking about metadata schemas for the last 2 hours UGM, and I come back again to give more updates about this metadata schemas. I did that as a subtitle, JSON schema as format and storage in iRODS, but I will focus mostly on giving a whole overview also because there might be a question of why we haven't used JSON schemas before or why weren't the schemas in iRODS before. And I would like to give a bit of history and also share our experience designing this, editing this, making this for our users, and what our journey has been like. Sorry, it's less than a movie. There it is. So I'm going to give a short story. It starts shortly before this UGM from 2 years ago. So I'm not going to go very deep into the topics that I already discussed 2 years ago or last year. I will reference them and I will try to focus on the future, but I do want to pick on them to show how we learn from them and how they came to be, and add a little bit of information that I didn't get to share back at that time. So part of it is how we started with the metadata schema manager. So we're focusing on this little bit that was developed mostly in the first half of 2023. And the idea was having this application with the following features. So one was allowing our users to apply rich and standardized metadata. So there would be users using an iRODS system, but we want to add another layer on top of the AVUs to help them use it in a, but to help them use it based on whatever needs they have, because the AVUs are very simple and very powerful, and therefore very hard to tackle for someone who's not sure how to start. We also want to support a hierarchical structure for metadata. If someone comes with metadata from before, or an idea of how they want to tag metadata, it is most likely to be hierarchical, to be in groups of fields that have some hierarchy inside, and we wanted to facilitate that for our users as well. And we also provided a whole system of a schema lifecycle. So users can design a schema, which is a form. They can use this form to add metadata, and then this form can change a lot with time. So maybe they design a form and then they realize they need another field or they need different values or something. So they have a version of the form that can be used to annotate, and then they can be working on a different form and upgrade it and have different versions, and you know with which version of your schema certain metadata was annotated. I'm not going to go deep into this. You can watch the presentation from 2 years ago for that. But this is basically the initial goal, yes, the features that we wanted to provide and that we started with at the beginning of 2023. The motivation for this was our users not having much experience with metadata, because other than iRODS, you don't have many other tools that allow you to add metadata or custom metadata to your research data. And these users might need to add metadata for publication purposes, for example, and then when they are about to publish, when they're done with their research and they want to get it over with, then they have to think of the metadata and where did that information come from and what is the format. And we are offering a space where they can learn about it, where they can start using it, but they might not be able to know how to. So some of them have experience with metadata and have very clear ideas what they want to do. And some users have never thought about metadata until they have an intake meeting with us. They want to use Mango, and we ask, do you want to use metadata? And they're like, I don't know. I have no idea. With flat AVUs, you can also, as I mentioned, it's very simple, very powerful, but then you don't know where to start. It's like a whole empty field, a blank page with too many options. So we designed something where they can create forms and they create them in a user-friendly way. They design their own forms. It is domain agnostic. We serve users from different domains, so we don't press them into using any specific kind of schema. We try to make it user-friendly and very flexible. That is a challenge in itself because we cannot impose certain restrictions. We have to try to serve multiple purposes. That is not an easy task. But so another thing that I didn't go deep enough, well, I didn't go much into in our first presentation 2 years ago was that we chose to use a vanilla JavaScript frontend, the Python backend. We use a format that is not JSON schema to describe the forms, and we are storing the schemas in the persistent storage of the website of Mango Portal. So in terms of the code, we wanted to limit the dependencies, not have a JavaScript framework like Vue or React or Angular, but so make it more maintainable. But also there were very few developers involved in that, as in like a bit more than one. So there's a lot of code that is messy, that was written as learning about the application, about JavaScript itself, and not a lot of distributed knowledge about how it grew. And it grew as we kept adding features as we came with them. We have a Python backend and using Bootstrap 5.3. That is quite okay. This started with the idea of using JSON schema, or that started to describe, to store the files describing the schema, but it was not ideal for our purposes because what we wanted to do was describe a form, not validate JSON. We were not using JSON, it was just ADUs. So we made some adjustments to JSON schemas. The types of the fields were going to be the input types, which are not the same kind of types that JSON schema used, and required is a property of a field instead of the property of the schema. So maybe show it a bit later. If you don't know JSON schema, this may make no sense. But the idea is JSON schema is meant for validation of JSON, and we wanted to create a form. That's all. So we didn't use it. That made no sense for us. And it was the easiest way to store them for now was in the file system where the portal was hosted. So then users don't have to handle permissions. They don't have access to the files themselves. They just manage, everyone can create forms and that's it. And then everything via the portal. So that worked for us. We didn't have to, and it was very fast, faster than accessing files from iRODS in this case. So that's how we started. But then things changed very slowly, right? So from mid-2023, so shortly after we deployed everything to production, things started to happen that changed this perspective, that this background that I'm showing. And I'm going to talk a bit about things we have been doing until a few months ago, and we're kind of still working on. So last year we presented a Python package, and it started first with a user request of saying, I would like to be able to import and export the schemas because I cannot copy pieces of schemas or schemas from one side to the other. So I would like to be able to have the JSON and do what I want with that, or sometimes write the JSON myself and then upload it. So we added a feature to download and to import and export this kind of JSON that we were using. And then there was a research group that was adding metadata as I've used as metadata schema, but from Python based on automatic metadata. And there was like, no, but that's breaking the things on the portal because they're using units in a way that we don't want them to. So I was like, okay, if you're going to use metadata schemas with Python, here, we give you a Python package. To do that, it's going to do the validation. It's going to use these files that now you can download, and you can validate your dictionary. You can turn it into AVUs, and then, so that was the goal. Funny thing is that research group in the end never used metadata again because they wanted to use the units in a different way from what we were wanting them to with the metadata schemas. So, okay, I thought at that moment this project died, whatever. But my amazing colleagues started talking about this project to other researchers and other ITers, mostly that were helping researchers and that were showing their problems. And it turned out that this package that was not solving the problem of the other research group did solve the problems of these other research groups. And it became very popular and then it got helped. And now we presented it in the UGM last year. And it does this conversion between Python dictionaries and AVUs following the metadata schema and the other way around. And then there were other user requests that were linked to this. So for example, a user request asking, hey, I want to be able to extract metadata from this file or from this instrument, and I want to be able to organize it and describe it with a schema. Because a schema now is not just a way of describing a form. It describes your metadata, what metadata is supposed to look like. It groups it together. It has a special visualization in the Mango portal. So it's way more than just the form creator for these users at that point. And it makes sense to use it even for metadata that comes from automatic systems, so that in a sense, it is already validated, but it as this validation, it as this grouping. So then we plug it to this metadata extraction. There were other user requests, for example, saying I have an Excel that has metadata, one row per data object and one column per metadata field with attributes and values. I would like to be able to turn that into a use. So we created a Python package that does just that, reads your Excel or your CSV and applies this metadata across different files with name and value pairs. It is not plugged to the metadata schemas yet, but it does do it by turning these rows into Python dictionaries and then going into the AVUs. So linking it to the Python package is just a low-hanging fruit. And we had another user request of being able to download the metadata, download the AVUs via the Mango portal in a JSON format, so export it in a way that other systems can read. And another one that you will see in a few minutes presented by Ingrid, the cold storage solution, in which we are packaging datasets, so turning full collections into a tar. And so you need to be able to extract the metadata of your data objects and collections in sidecar files, which is the same aspect of this downloading the metadata. And all these three, and this is also plugging the Python package, right? And all these three requests take you to AVUs becoming JSONs or Python dictionaries that become AVUs. So schema metadata that comes from Python dictionaries, or you get a Python dictionary from an Excel and you turn it into a AVU, or for the packaging and download any kind of AVU, schema or not, that has to become JSON format. So this is an entirely different landscape from where we started. And this is one where we now want validation and standard representation. So now the schemas are not just create a form. Now they are validating dictionaries or JSONs because we are not just working on AVUs. We are working way beyond the portal as well. It's being used and exploring in a very fantastic way based on what our users are needing. So what are we doing now with that? The past weeks and months, we've been doing a lot of hard work. So one is converting the schemas that we have into JSON schema format. It's not very hard because the format was based on JSON schema, but it requires some thinking and discussion and so on. We are also storing the metadata in iRODS, and there is another icon that maybe some of you know, maybe some other not, which is we are rewriting the whole application from start. For different reasons. One is to implement modern web and browser standards. We are using Lit, which is a library wrapping web components. This means that we still don't depend on any of these major JavaScript frameworks. It's going to last quite long, but it's very beautiful code. We have tested, we have recreated part of the application, and the code is like 3 times shorter. It's very lightweight, it's really reactive, and you create your own HTML elements and attach whatever data you have in there. So now the JavaScript, the metadata schema manager code has classes that contain all this data and have a rendering function for an HTML. But in this kind of new code that is going to come up in the next months, the HTML elements themselves contain the data, like the information for the forms and the different properties that is required, that is repeatable, and all of these things. And it's really very nice to work with. The other goal of rewriting is that there's many people working together, at least 4, that they all make decisions together, they all understand the code, and we all know where we're going because we already got there, at least this point where we are, and we can learn from the experience of the previous development. This goes much slower than the previous experience, but it's going to be much more stable and like it's going to last longer. That's For example, if I know a lot of the code now and I have to go for some reason, then it's going to be harder for others to keep working to maintain my code. And the idea with this is like any of us can continue working on the code, can debug, can understand it, and that also we make it more understandable to many more people, and more people can work together. And this application also becomes something that can go beyond AVUs, that can become just create a form or design a JSON schema by creating forms. By using JSON schema, why? Because now we want to validate metadata beyond the portal. We want to validate JSONs, and the AVUs are just one usage of them. And it becomes a general form editor. So for people who are not thinking of metadata, but just creating JSON schema, this application is also useful. So this makes us much more powerful in an open source community. I still have some challenges. For example, how much of the UI can be described within JSON schema. We are trying a bit, and we're going to see whether we need another type of JSON that goes with JSON schema to describe the rendering on the form. That is something we're still working on. We already have code to write and read JSON schema from the schema manager, and to convert existing schemas is like 80% done. We're going to continue working on the conversion in the next weeks. Now, by having the schemas in iRODS, the users can read it and download it more easily. At the beginning, that was not necessary anymore, but now that they need to have access to the files in order to have validation outside of the portal, it's more important that they can read and download it. And the permission management is now taken care of by the portal anyways. Not everyone edits. You can decide who can manage or not the schemas, but the portal manages the edition. So you use the operator account to just modify the schemas or create them or delete them. But users can use any client to read their schemas now. And it's going to make it easier to use rules for metadata protection, which we still have to work on. We have the code to write and read in iRODS, the script to migrate the existing schemas to iRODS. We still have to see about how to tag them to the metadata and use metadata for the schemas themselves. Okay, I have very little time left, so I'm going to very quickly close my, I just have 2 slides left, which is okay. That's where we are now. What are the thoughts for the next weeks, months, years? One is we do need some custom conversion to validate the JSON schema, which is part of what the Python package is doing. So for example, from AVUs, you cannot know if an instance of an AVU is an array of 1 when converted to a JSON, or just one item that it can be. And if you cannot convert that properly, the JSON schema is not going to validate it properly. So we have to work on that and see whether we reuse MongoMD schema or how we do this conversion. Then there is the code from the metadata templates work group that we might be able to use for protection rules. I was looking at it again and realized some things that I'm like, but we can talk about it in the Q&A if you want. But I'm not sure if it's going to work or not. But if it doesn't work, I'm sure I can sit with Daryl and we're going to figure it out. And main things that I want to bring from this presentation, yes, I did focus a lot on the schema manager, but the idea is we're working more together on the code, sharing the knowledge and ideas, and we want to create a quality product that involves many people, where many people can learn from, and that can take ideas from a variety of experiences, and that is creating a very nice product. And very importantly, to keep listening to our users, because that was the source of all this inspiration. We have grown a lot by paying attention to our users' needs and developing based on that, even when sometimes the users didn't need what we made, but someone else did, and that took us to very interesting directions. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I am open for your Q&A.
All right. Do we have any questions? Oh, we got one here.
Hey, Mariana, this is Terrell. So of course I have a
Hi.
question. Do you have any way of knowing how much people are using this information? Do you have a way to discover, how successful this is, other than people reaching out and saying, I'm finding this useful?
Within our Mango or outside of Mango?
Yes.
Good. Within Normango, yes, in the sense that the metadata has namespacing, so we can query for the metadata that starts with MGS, and then we can know how much metadata there is with schemas. That is for sure. We can also check how many schemas are created. For now, what I can say is that there are a few power users, and then for most people, it's not something that they really think of. But that also has to do with the state, how recent Mango is in our university, how they are starting with research data management, how they're starting with learning about metadata in itself. So I think it's going to definitely grow. So yes, we have by looking at this namespacing. So there we can see how much metadata there is, and we can also check how many schemas there are because we have the files. Outside of us, we have a few people reporting issues, which is like, oh no, there's an issue, and oh wow, there's people really interested in this because they're actually reporting issues. So that is very encouraging. And we also recently went to a conference about metadata, where people who are not using iRODS at all were very interested in the application as well for other systems. And they just learned about this, so of course they are not using it. But I think once we develop this more and we properly package it, we're going to see more activity in the GitHub repository and so on.
That's great. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? So in your presentation, I noticed that you had no major JavaScript framework, which stuck out the most to me. What motivated you to go that direction, and I'm not familiar with lit.dev, but what motivated you to move away from major JavaScript frameworks?
Well, I personally was never with any major JavaScript framework. When I started working on this, I already got the assignment of not using any of them. And for me, that was great because I didn't know them. I'm not a traditional web developer anyway. So the explanation I got for why not to use it is because when they have updates, or sometimes they upgrade the framework and then you have to refactor your code. Basically, like you don't know how long your code is really going to be valid if it's depending on one of these frameworks, or if you have someone else that is going to come and develop or continue developing on your code, they might not know the version that you're using, or that there is much more of a learning curve in that sense. And JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, especially now with web components, and Lit is a wrapper around these web components. So web components are now basic JavaScript, they are basic HTML and JavaScript and totally supported, but they're very new. And they are doing basically the same thing as these frameworks, except that they're going to be supported by core JavaScript. So they're going to be working on any browser, and that's going to be supported for a long time. And Lit adds a bit of wrapper on that with all this boilerplate stuff, and it's very lightweight. So it's not, you don't really depend on Lit the same way that you would depend on these frameworks.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to move on to our next speaker.